I was declared dead for 12 minutes. Something followed me back. Chapter 1, The Accident. The rain hammered against the windshield like bullets from heaven, each drop exploding into 1,000 fragments before being swept away by the overworked wipers. Marcus Chun gripped the steering wheel tighter, his architect's eye automatically calculating angles, the slope of the road, the curve ahead, the trajectory needed to navigate safely through this torrential nightmare. "Sarah, I'm about 20 minutes out," he said into his Bluetooth headset, trying to keep the tension from his voice. His wife's warm laughter filled the car, momentarily pushing back the anxiety that had been building all evening. "Drive carefully, love. It's coming down hard here, too. The news says it's the worst storm in decades." Marcus glanced at the architectural plans scattered across his passenger seat, blueprints for the new children's hospital that had finally gotten approval after months of bureaucratic battles. Tomorrow, he and Sarah would celebrate with champagne and Chinese takeout, their usual ritual for professional victories. "I can't wait to show you the final designs. The skylight in the pediatric ward turned out exactly like you suggested." The words died in his throat. Through the wall of rain, headlights appeared where they shouldn't be. A massive semi-truck, its trailer jackknifing across the median, sliding sideways toward Marcus's lane like a steel leviathan emerging from the depths of the storm. Time crystallized. Marcus had perhaps 2 seconds to react. His hands yanked the wheel hard left, but physics had already made its cruel calculations. The truck's momentum was unstoppable, a 40-ton missile aimed directly at his small Honda Civic. "Sarah, I love." The impact was apocalyptic. Metal screamed against metal as the truck's trailer crumpled the driver's side of Marcus's car like an aluminum can. The vehicle flipped once, twice, 3 times before slamming into a centuries-old oak tree with a sound like thunder. Then silence. The kind of silence that exists only in the moments between heartbeats, between life and whatever comes after. Marcus hung upside down in his seatbelt, warm liquid, blood, he realized distantly, trickling down his forehead into his hair. His vision blurred, but strangely, he felt no pain. Instead, there was an odd sense of weightlessness, as if he were floating just above his own body. Through the shattered windshield, he could see the storm continuing its assault on the world, but he could no longer hear it. The silence was expanding, consuming everything, until even his own heartbeat faded to nothing. His last conscious thought was of Sarah's face, the way she looked when she laughed, the tiny scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident she'd told him about on their 3rd date. He tried to hold onto that image as the darkness closed in, gentle and absolute. The paramedics found him 12 minutes later. Jennifer Torres, a 20-year veteran who'd seen everything the highway could dish out, worked with mechanical precision as her team extracted Marcus from the wreckage. His body was broken, multiple fractures, severe head trauma, internal bleeding, but it was his eyes that unnerved her. They were open, staring at something beyond the storm-torn sky, and there was an expression in them she'd never seen before. Not pain, not fear. Something else entirely. Something that made her skin crawl. No pulse. Her partner called out as they loaded Marcus into the ambulance. "How long since impact?" "EMTs estimate 12 minutes, maybe more," Jennifer replied, starting chest compressions. The monitor's flatline screech filled the ambulance as they raced towards St. Mary's Hospital, Jennifer pumping Marcus's chest with methodical determination. But even as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong about this particular save. At exactly 12 minutes and 15 seconds after his heart had stopped, Marcus Chin took a breath. His eyes, which had been staring at nothing, suddenly focused with laser intensity on Jennifer's face. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, but the words made every person in that ambulance go cold. It followed me back. Chapter 2, Awakening. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and fear. Marcus had been unconscious for 3 days, his body healing from injuries that should have killed him. When he finally woke, Sarah was asleep in the bedside chair, her hand still resting on his arm, as if she could anchor him to the world of the living through touch alone. Marcus studied his wife's sleeping face, noting the new lines of worry around her eyes, the way her usually perfect hair was disheveled from too many nights spent in uncomfortable hospital furniture. He wanted to reach out and smooth those worry lines away, but his attention kept drifting to the corner of the room. There was someone standing there. The figure was indistinct, wavering like heat shimmer, but unmistakably human in shape. An elderly woman in what appeared to be a nurse's uniform from several decades past. She stood perfectly still, watching Marcus with eyes that held depths he didn't want to explore. "You're awake," Sarah said, startling him. She'd opened her eyes and was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that barely concealed tears. "How do you feel?" "Different," Marcus replied honestly, then quickly added, "But better, much better." He forced himself to look away from the corner, focusing entirely on Sarah's face. Her smile became more genuine. "Dr. Hayward says you're a miracle." 12 minutes, Marcus. You were clinically dead for 12 full minutes. By all medical logic, you should have massive brain damage if you survived at all. "I remember some of it," Marcus said carefully. "What do you remember?" Marcus hesitated. How could he explain the place he'd been? Not a tunnel with white light. Nothing like the near-death experiences people described in books and movies. Instead, he found himself in a vast gray space, neither warm nor cold, filled with whispers and languages he didn't recognize. And he hadn't been alone. Darkness at first. Then not light exactly. More like the absence of darkness. And voices. Lots of voices. Sarah squeezed his hand. That must have been terrifying. It wasn't the voices that scared me. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Dr. Hayward entered with his clipboard and professional smile. He was a man in his 50s with kind eyes and hands that had guided hundreds of people back from the brink of death. "Good morning, Marcus. Ready for some neurological tests?" "Doctor," Marcus said, his eyes drawn back to the corner. "Who's that nurse over there?" Dr. Hayward and Sarah followed his gaze to the empty corner of the room. "What nurse, Marcus?" "The elderly woman in the old-fashioned uniform. She's been watching me since I woke up." Sarah and Dr. Hayward exchanged the kind of look that passes between people when they're witnessing something they don't understand and don't like. "Marcus," Dr. Hayward said gently, "there's no one in that corner." But Marcus could see her clearly now. The woman's uniform was crisp white with a red cross on the chest, the kind nurses wore in the 1940s. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes held a sadness so profound it made Marcus's chest ache. She was shaking her head slowly, as if disappointed in him. "She's looking right at me," Marcus insisted, "and she seems upset about something." Dr. Hayward made a note on his clipboard. "We're going to run some tests, Marcus. Sometimes severe trauma can affect perception temporarily." As they wheeled Marcus through the hospital corridors for his MRI, he saw them everywhere. Spirits, ghosts, whatever they were. They populated every corner of St. Mary's Hospital like invisible patients who would never be discharged. A man in a 1950s suit walked past them going the opposite direction, his face bearing the telltale signs of a massive stroke. A child, no more than 7, sat cross-legged on the floor near the pediatric ward, playing with toys only she could see. But it was the others that truly unnerved Marcus. Scattered among the obviously deceased were figures that didn't belong, dark shapes that moved with purpose rather than the aimless wandering of spirits. And all of them, every single supernatural inhabitant of the hospital, turned to watch Marcus as he passed. During the MRI, Marcus lay perfectly still in a machine, but his mind raced. In the reflection of the observation window, he could see the technician working the controls. And standing directly behind the technician, close enough to touch, was something that made Marcus's blood turn to ice water. It wasn't like the spirits. This entity was solid, real, and radiated malevolence like heat from a furnace. It stood 7 feet tall, humanoid but wrong in every conceivable way. Its flesh, if it could be called flesh, was the color of old blood, and its eyes burned with an intelligence that was ancient and hungry. "Get away from him," Marcus screamed. "It's right behind you." The technician's voice crackled through the intercom. "Just try to relax, Mr. Chin. We're almost finished. You don't understand. There's something in there with you. But when the technician turned to look, there was nothing there. The entity had vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving only the faintest smell of sulfur in the air. Later, when Dr. Hayward delivered the test results, his expression was puzzled. Everything appears normal, Marcus. No signs of brain damage. No neurological abnormalities that would explain these visions. Then why can I see them? Near-death experiences can sometimes trigger changes in brain chemistry that affect perception. Usually, these effects are temporary. But Marcus knew, with the certainty that comes from direct experience, that what he was seeing wasn't a trick of brain chemistry. The entity in the MRI room had been as real as the doctor standing beside his bed. And unlike the hospital's resident spirits, who seemed content to simply exist in their ethereal state, this thing had been studying the technician with the focused attention of a predator selecting its prey. That night, alone in his hospital room, with Sarah sleeping fitfully in the bedside chair, Marcus watched the elderly nurse spirit take her position in the corner. She was joined by others throughout the night, patients who had died in this very room over the decades. They formed a silent vigil around his bed, and Marcus began to understand that they weren't just watching him. They were protecting him. From what? He was about to discover. Chapter 3. Homecoming. The Chun house sat in the middle of Maple Street, like a postcard image of suburban perfection. 2 stories of white clapboard siding, green shutters, and a front porch that Sarah had decorated with hanging plants, and a swing where they'd spent countless evening hours planning their future together. But as Marcus stood on the front walkway, suitcase in hand, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "Home sweet home," Sarah said, her voice carrying forced cheer. She'd been walking on eggshells around him since the hospital, trying to maintain normalcy while clearly worrying about his mental state. Marcus managed to smile. "It's good to be back." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue, because standing in their living room window, visible only to him, was the same dark entity from the hospital. It raised one elongated finger to what might have been its lips in a gesture of silence, then disappeared deeper into the house. Inside, everything appeared exactly as they'd left it. Sarah had clearly spent hours cleaning and organizing during his hospital stay. Fresh flowers on the coffee table, his favorite books stacked neatly on the side table, the throw pillows arranged just so. It was perfect. Too perfect. Marcus's architect's eye, trained to notice subtle details and structural relationships, immediately picked up on small discrepancies. The living room paintings were hanging slightly askew, each tilted by maybe 2 degrees. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough to make the space feel subtly wrong. The coffee table had been moved approximately 3 inches closer to the couch. The area rug was positioned incorrectly, its pattern not quite centered in the room. "Sarah, did you rearrange anything while I was gone?" "Just cleaned," she called from the kitchen, where she was preparing his favorite tea. "Why?" Marcus began straightening the paintings, but as his hand touched the first frame, he heard it, a whisper so soft it might have been his imagination. "You shouldn't have come back." He spun around. The living room was empty except for Sarah's humming from the kitchen. "Everything okay in there?" Sarah appeared with 2 steaming mugs. "Perfect," Marcus said, accepting the tea and trying to calm his racing heart. But as the day progressed, the small incidents multiplied. The kitchen faucet turned on by itself while they were eating lunch. Sarah laughed it off as water pressure issues, but Marcus watched as the handle turned with deliberate precision, as if guided by an invisible hand. Books fell from shelves in his home office while he was working at his desk. Not all at once, which might be explained by a structural problem, but one by one, at intervals just long enough to make him question his sanity. The temperature in certain rooms fluctuated wildly. The guest bedroom felt like a walk-in freezer, while the basement was stifling hot despite the October weather. By evening, Marcus was exhausted from pretending everything was normal. Sarah had noticed his jumpiness, but attributed it to post-trauma stress, which he was content to let her believe. The truth, that their home was now occupied by something that viewed their continued existence as a personal affront, was too terrible to share. That night, lying in bed beside his sleeping wife, Marcus heard the footsteps begin. Slow, deliberate steps in the hallway outside their bedroom. The floorboards creaked in sequence, as if someone was pacing back and forth. But these weren't the random, settling sounds old houses make. These footsteps had purpose and patience. Marcus slipped out of bed and crept to the door. Through the crack underneath, he could see shadows moving in the hallway. Not the static shadows cast by moonlight through windows, but shadows that shifted and danced with autonomous intelligence. He opened the door slowly and stepped into the hallway. The temperature drop was immediate and shocking, like stepping into a meat locker. His breath came out in visible puffs as he made his way toward the stairs, following the sounds that seemed to be leading him somewhere specific. In the living room, every drawer in the antique bureau stood open, their contents scattered across the floor, as if someone had been searching frantically for something. But it was the piano that made Marcus's blood freeze. Keys were being pressed by invisible fingers, not creating music, but producing a discordant series of notes that formed no recognizable melody. It was the sound of chaos given voice, random and yet somehow purposeful, like a message being tapped out in a code Marcus didn't understand. "Sarah," he called out, but the piano fell silent the instant her name left his lips. When Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing sleep from her eyes, the living room looked perfectly normal. The bureau drawers were closed, papers back in their proper places, the piano bench neatly tucked under the keyboard. "What's wrong?" she asked, coming down the stairs. The piano was playing by itself. Sarah looked at him with the expression he was beginning to dread, equal parts love and concern, tinged with the kind of worry reserved for people whose grip on reality might be slipping. "Honey, pianos don't play by themselves." She demonstrated by pressing a few keys, producing normal sounds. "Maybe you were dreaming? I wasn't asleep. You've been through a lot, Marcus. Your mind is trying to process trauma in ways we don't fully understand." As they headed back upstairs, Marcus caught a glimpse of movement in his peripheral vision. In the hallway mirror, for just a split second, he saw the reflection of something sitting at the piano bench, something tall and thin and wrong, its fingers still poised over the keys, as if interrupted mid-performance. When he turned to look directly at the piano, there was nothing there, but the bench was now pulled out from the keyboard, and one key, middle C, was pressed down and held, producing a single, sustained note that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards and into Marcus's bones. Sarah didn't seem to hear it. The note continued all night, a monotonous tone that threaded through Marcus's dreams and made sleep impossible. And sometime in the small hours before dawn, as he lay staring at the ceiling and listening to that endless note, Marcus began to understand a terrible truth. The entity wasn't just haunting their house. It was tuning it like an instrument, preparing it for something much worse than poltergeist activity. It was preparing their home to become a gateway. Chapter 4, The Gift. Oakland Hills Cemetery sprawled across 40 acres of rolling green hills, its headstones and monuments creating a marble and granite city for the dead. Marcus had come here seeking solitude, hoping that distance from his haunted house might provide clarity about what was happening to him. Instead, he'd stumbled into his worst nightmare. The cemetery was crowded with spirits. They wandered between the graves like visitors at an outdoor museum, some in modern dress, others in clothing that marked them as residents of decades past. A woman in a 1920s flapper dress knelt beside a small headstone, her phantom tears falling onto earth that couldn't absorb them. A soldier in a World War II uniform stood at attention beside a flag-draped grave, his salute eternal and unacknowledged. And they were all looking at Marcus. Patients occupied a narrow storefront between a laundromat and a check-cashing business in the seedier part of downtown. The neon sign in the window flickered intermittently, casting pink and blue shadows on the cracked sidewalk. Marcus hesitated at the door. 3 days off the medication, and his supernatural sight had returned with a vengeance. The spirits around him were more visible than ever and more agitated. They seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen. "This feels like a mistake," he said to Sarah. "Dr. Walsh's pills didn't work. The church we tried yesterday threw us out when you started speaking in tongues during the consultation. This is our last option." The bell above the door chimed as they entered, but it wasn't the cheerful sound of a shop bell. Instead, it produced a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate in Marcus's bones. The interior was exactly what he'd expected. Heavy velvet curtains, crystal balls, tarot cards, and enough incense burning to obscure a small army. But what he hadn't expected was the woman who emerged from behind the beaded curtain that separated the front of the shop from the back. Madame Zelda was approximately 60 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that were the palest blue Marcus had ever seen. She wore a simple black dress and no jewelry except for a pendant around her neck that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Marcus Chen," she said before he could introduce himself. "You've been expecting you. How did you? The dead have been talking about you for weeks. Word travels fast in the spirit world when someone tears a hole between dimensions." She gestured for them to sit at a round table in the center of the room. As they took their seats, Marcus noticed that every spirit in the shop, and there were dozens of them, had arranged themselves in a circle around the table, watching with intense concentration. "You can see them too," Marcus said. "I've been seeing them since I was 7 years old. Car accident, clinically dead for 8 minutes. Sound familiar?" Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with supernatural activity. "You've been through this." "Not exactly. My resurrection was cleaner. I came back alone. You, on the other hand, seem to have brought a passenger." Madame Zelda placed her hands flat on the table, and immediately the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. The candles around the shop began to flicker in unison, their flames dancing to a rhythm that had nothing to do with air currents. "Tell me what you remember about your time on the other side." Marcus closed his eyes, trying to recall those 12 minutes of clinical death. Darkness at first, then a gray place. Not quite light, not quite dark, and there were others there. Describe them. Shapes, human-shaped but indistinct. They were waiting for something, or someone. And you spoke to them? Not exactly spoke. More like communicated without words. They seemed surprised to see me there, like I wasn't supposed to be in that place yet. Madame Zelda nodded grimly. The liminal space, the waiting room between life and death. Most people pass through it so quickly they don't remember it, but you lingered there for 12 minutes. What does that mean? It means you had time to form connections, to make friends. The word friends hung in the air like a curse. Around them, the circle of spirits began to agitate, their forms becoming more translucent as if they were afraid. One of them followed you back, Madame Zelda continued. Something that was never meant to exist in our world. And now it's using you as an anchor, growing stronger by feeding on your life force and the life force of those around you. How do we get rid of it? Madame Zelda was quiet for a long moment, her pale eyes fixed on something just over Marcus's shoulder. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It's here, right now, standing behind you." Marcus started to turn, but she grabbed his wrist. "Don't look at it directly. Not yet. You're not strong enough." What does it want? What it's always wanted. To live. Really live. Not just exist in the spaces between worlds. And it's figured out how to do it. Sarah leaned forward. How? By taking over Marcus's body permanently. Right now. It can only possess him for short periods before his soul fights back. But every time it takes control, it learns more about how to manipulate his physical form. Eventually, it will be strong enough to push his consciousness out completely. And then Marcus Chen dies, and something ancient and hungry gets to experience life in a human body, with all the appetites and desires that entails. The candles around the room suddenly blazed higher, their flames reaching toward the ceiling. How? Madame Zelda reached into a drawer and pulled out an ancient leather-bound book. The cover was unmarked, but the pages were yellowed with age and covered in symbols that seemed to shift and move when Marcus looked at them directly. There's a ritual. Dangerous, but possible. It requires Marcus to willingly return to the liminal space, to die again, temporarily, and confront the entity on its home ground. Absolutely not, Sarah said immediately. It's the only way, Madame Zelda replied. The entity can't be banished from our world by force. It has to be convinced to return to its own realm, and that can only happen if Marcus meets it as an equal, as another being temporarily displaced from life. Marcus stared at the book, his mind racing. What are the chances I come back? Unknown. The ritual has been attempted 3 times in recorded history. Twice, the person performing it never returned. The 3rd time. What happened the 3rd time? The person came back changed. Still human, but carrying a piece of the other side with them forever. They could see and communicate with the dead for the rest of their life. But they were also marked. Other entities could sense them, hunt them. So either I die attempting this ritual, or I spend the rest of my life being stalked by supernatural predators? Those are the options. Sarah stood up abruptly. There has to be another way. But even as she spoke, the lights in the shop began to strobe frantically. The temperature plummeted so rapidly that frost began forming on the windows. And from somewhere that seemed both very far away and uncomfortably close, came a sound like laughter. If laughter could be made from breaking glass and screaming children. It's made its decision, Madame Zelda said, her voice cutting through the supernatural chaos. It's done playing games. Marcus, look at your wife. Marcus turned to look at Sarah and felt his heart stop. She was floating 3 feet off the ground. Her eyes rolled back to show only whites, her mouth open in a silent scream. Dark veins were spreading across her skin like ink through water. It's not just after you anymore, Madame Zelda said, as Sarah's possessed form turned to face him with a smile that belonged to something that had never been human. Marcus realized that his time for hesitation had run out. The entity was done waiting. Chapter 8, Possession. Sarah's body hung suspended in midair, defying gravity with casual malevolence. But it was her face that made Marcus's blood turn to ice water. The features were hers, but the expression belonged to something that had never learned to be human. Hello again, Marcus, Sarah's voice said, but harmonized with itself in impossible ways, creating overtones that hurt to hear. I told you we needed to discuss terms. Let her go, Marcus managed through a throat that felt lined with broken glass. Oh, but she's so comfortable. Do you know what it feels like to have a heartbeat? To feel blood moving through veins? It's intoxicating. Madame Zelda remained seated, but Marcus could see her hands moving beneath the table, tracing symbols on its surface with practiced precision. What do you want? Marcus asked. Sarah's possessed form drifted closer, her feet still not touching the ground. I want what was promised to me. You cheated death, broke the contract that keeps the living and dead in their proper places. Someone has to pay the price. Take me then. Leave her out of this. The entity laughed through Sarah's mouth, and the sound made every piece of glass in the shop develop hairline cracks. You still don't understand. This isn't about punishment, it's about balance. You took a life that wasn't yours to take. Now I get to take one that is. Sarah's life wasn't mine to give. But you gave it anyway. The moment you chose to return from death, you condemned everyone connected to you. Your wife, your family, your friends, they're all forfeit now. Marcus felt something inside him break, not physically, but spiritually. The weight of what his resurrection had cost the people he loved settled on him like a crushing weight. There is another way, Madame Zelda said quietly, her hands still moving beneath the table. The possessed Sarah turned toward her with predatory interest. The medium speaks. How refreshing. Tell me, old woman, what wisdom do you think you can offer? A trade, a willing exchange. I'm listening. Marcus returns to the liminal space voluntarily. He meets you there as an equal, not as prey. If you can convince him to stay permanently, you get his life essence and his body. If he convinces you to return to your realm, You release all claims on him and everyone connected to him. The entity considered this, tilting Sarah's head at an angle that was just slightly wrong, as if it hadn't quite mastered the mechanics of human anatomy. And what stops me from simply keeping both of them? The rules that govern your existence. You're a creature of contracts and balances. You can take by force, but what you take by force can be taken from you by force. What you gain through willing agreement, however, becomes permanently yours. Marcus stared at Madame Zelda. You're asking me to bet my life on my ability to out-argue a supernatural entity. I'm asking you to bet your life on your love for your wife. The possessed Sarah drifted back to the center of the room, and Marcus could see that the dark veins spreading across her skin were getting thicker, more pronounced. Whatever the entity was doing to her body, it was causing damage. How long does she have? He asked. Human bodies aren't designed to contain our kind of energy, the entity said with Sarah's voice. I'd estimate 6 hours before the vessel becomes permanently damaged. And if I agree to this ritual? If you agree and win, everyone goes free. If you agree and lose, at least your wife dies quickly instead of slowly. It wasn't really a choice at all. I'll do it. Marcus, no. Sarah's own voice broke through for just a moment before the entity reasserted control. The decision is made, Madame Zelda said, standing up from the table. But we'll need time to prepare. The ritual requires specific materials and conditions. How much time? For hours. The entity smiled with Sarah's mouth. Perfect. That gives me time to enjoy this lovely body a bit longer. Did you know, Marcus, that your wife dreams about children? I can see all her memories, all her hopes and fears. She's been trying to work up the courage to tell you she wants to start a family. Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Don't. Such beautiful dreams. I particularly enjoy the ones where she imagines teaching a little girl to paint, or watching a little boy take his first steps. She's even picked out names, Emma for a girl, David for a boy. Stop. When I'm done with her body, those dreams will be the first things to die. Then her memories of you. Then her memories of herself. By the time I'm finished, there won't be enough left of Sarah Chen to fill a thimble. Marcus lunged forward, but his hands passed harmlessly through Sarah's floating form. Temper, temper, the entity chided. Save your energy for our contest. You're going to need it. With that, Sarah's body gently lowered to the ground. Her eyes rolled back to their normal position, and she collapsed, unconscious but breathing. Marcus caught her as she fell, checking her pulse and breathing. Both were weak but steady. She'll be fine for now, Madame Zelda said, but the possession left marks on her. The entity will be able to find her anywhere, possess her again at will, until this is resolved. Then we better make sure I win. Madame Zelda nodded grimly as she began pulling items from various drawers and cabinets, candles, crystals, vials of liquid that seemed to absorb light, and other things Marcus couldn't identify. There's something you should know about the liminal space, she said as she worked. Time moves differently there. What feels like hours might be minutes in our world, or vice versa. And the entity will have advantages. It's been there longer, understands the rules better. What advantages do I have? You're fighting for love. That gives you power in any realm. And you've been there before. Your subconscious mind remembers the way things work. Marcus looked down at Sarah's unconscious form. Her skin was still pale, and the dark veins had faded, but not completely disappeared. What if I don't come back? Then I'll do everything I can to protect Sarah and anyone else the entity might target. But Marcus, if you lose this contest, if the entity wins permanent claim to your body, the damage it could do to the world would be catastrophic. You wouldn't just be sacrificing yourself. You'd be giving a creature of pure malevolence access to human society. The weight of responsibility settled on Marcus like a lead blanket. It wasn't just about saving Sarah anymore. It was about preventing something ancient and hungry from walking freely among the living, wearing his face and using his knowledge of the human world to cause unimaginable harm. Outside Madame Zelda's shop, storm clouds were gathering despite the weather forecast, calling for clear skies. Lightning flickered in the darkness between clouds, but there was no thunder, just a low, constant rumbling that seemed to come from underground. The entity was preparing for their contest as well, and as Marcus held his unconscious wife and watched Madame Zelda arrange the tools needed to temporarily kill him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap that had been centuries in the making. Chapter 9. Others Like Me. Dr. Amanda Reyes had been studying near-death experiences for 20 years, but she'd never encountered a case like Marcus Chen's. Her office at Stanford University was lined with filing cabinets containing thousands of interviews with people who'd been clinically dead and returned. But Marcus's story was unique in the worst possible way. "You're the fourth person to contact me this month with a similar story," she told Marcus and Sarah as they sat across from her desk. "That's unprecedented. In 2 decades of research, I've never seen a cluster of cases like this." Marcus leaned forward. "What do you mean, similar?" "Resurrection experiences followed by supernatural manifestations, poltergeist activity, possession events, encounters with entities that claim to have followed the subjects back from death." Sarah gripped Marcus's hand tighter. "Are they all dangerous?" "Yes. 3 of the other cases resulted in violent deaths, not of the subjects themselves, but of people around them. Family members, friends, healthcare workers." Dr. Reyes pulled a thick file from her desk drawer. "Jennifer Walsh, age 34, died in a car accident in Portland. Resuscitated after 11 minutes. Within 2 weeks, her husband and 2 children were found dead in their home, killed by what the coroner described as extreme blunt force trauma consistent with being beaten by someone of superhuman strength. Jennifer was found catatonic at the scene." She pulled out another file. "David Kumar, age 28, died from an allergic reaction in Phoenix. Dead for 14 minutes before paramedics got his heart started again. 6 weeks later, his elderly parents and 2 siblings were found dead in their family restaurant. Security cameras showed David apparently murdering them, but with physical capabilities no human should possess, moving faster than the eye could follow, demonstrating impossible strength." "What happened to David?" "He disappeared. Police found evidence he'd been researching occult practices, trying to find ways to send back what shouldn't be here, according to his internet search history." Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach. And the third case, Maria Santos, age 42, died during surgery in Denver. 15 minutes without a heartbeat. 3 weeks later, her teenage daughter was found hanging from a noose in their garage. But here's the disturbing part. The girl was suspended 12 feet off the ground, and there was no ladder or chair anywhere near the body. It was physically impossible for her to have hanged herself at that height. Dr. Reyes closed the files and looked directly at Marcus. All 3 subjects reported the same symptoms you're describing. Seeing spirits, poltergeist activity, possession events. And in all 3 cases, the supernatural activity escalated dramatically before someone died. Did any of them find a way to stop it? David Kumar might have. He vanished before his family was killed, and there's been no supernatural activity associated with him since. But we don't know if he found a solution, or if whatever was attached to him simply found new victims. Sarah spoke up. "Dr. Reyes, what's causing this? Why are people suddenly coming back from death with supernatural hitchhikers?" Dr. Reyes turned to her computer and pulled up a map of the United States. Red dots marked locations across the country. All of these incidents occurred within the last 8 months. All the subjects died in areas with high electromagnetic activity, near power plants, research facilities, places where the normal magnetic field of the Earth is disrupted. She zoomed in on Marcus's location. "You died 3 miles from the Brookhaven Particle Accelerator, which has been running experiments on quantum entanglement for the past year. You think the experiments are connected to this?" "I think the experiments might be weakening the barriers between dimensions. Every major religion and mystical tradition has stories about places where the veil between worlds is thin. What if modern science has found a way to make those veils thinner?" Marcus stared at the map, counting the red dots. How many cases are there total? Verified? 15. But I've got reports of dozens more that I'm still investigating. Marcus, I think we're looking at the beginning of something much larger than isolated incidents. She pulled up another screen showing electromagnetic readings from various locations around the country. The readings have been spiking for months. Whatever's happening, it's accelerating. The barriers between our world and whatever lies beyond are becoming more permeable. What does that mean for people like me? It means you're not freaks or anomalies. You're canaries in a coal mine. And if the pattern holds, there are going to be a lot more cases like yours in the coming months. Dr. Reyes handed Marcus a business card with a phone number written on the back. David Kumar's sister. She's been trying to track him down since he disappeared. She might have information about what he discovered. As they left Dr. Reyes' office, Marcus felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. Relief that he wasn't going insane, that what was happening to him was part of a larger phenomenon with identifiable causes. Terror because that same phenomenon seemed to be claiming lives with increasing frequency. "We need to call David's sister," Sarah said as they walked to their car. But Marcus was staring at the sky, where storm clouds were gathering with unnatural speed. Lightning flickered between the clouds in patterns that looked almost like symbols, and the air itself felt charged with malevolent energy. "I don't think we have time," he said. "Look." Sarah followed his gaze and gasped. The clouds weren't just gathering. They were forming a spiral directly above them, like a supernatural hurricane with its eyes centered on their exact location. And as they watched, other figures began appearing on the sidewalks around them, translucent at first, then becoming more solid with each passing second. Spirits that shouldn't be able to manifest in broad daylight, all of them turning to stare at Marcus with expressions of desperate hunger. "It's starting," Marcus said. "Whatever's been building up to this moment, it's starting now." The entity attached to him wasn't just getting stronger. It was calling others of its kind, opening doorways for things that had been waiting in the spaces between worlds for centuries. And Marcus realized that his personal battle with the supernatural hitchhiker was about to become something much larger and more terrifying. The invasion was beginning. Chapter 10, The Revelation. The basement of Madame Zelda's shop felt like descending into the earth's core. Ancient symbols covered every surface, carved into stone walls, painted on the ceiling, etched into the iron floor in patterns that seemed to shift when viewed peripherally. Candles provided the only light, the flames burning in impossible colors that had no names. Marcus lay on a stone altar in the center of the room, his heart pounding as Madame Zelda made final preparations for the ritual. Sarah sat in a chair nearby, still weak from her possession, but insisting on being present. "Before we begin," Madame Zelda said, "you need to understand exactly what you're facing." She opened the ancient leather book to a page covered in symbols that seemed to writhe like living things. The entity that followed you back isn't a demon or a ghost in the traditional sense. It's what we call a harvester, one of the original inhabitants of the liminal space between life and death. Original inhabitants. The space you visited during your clinical death isn't empty, Marcus. It's populated by beings that exist to collect souls that linger too long between worlds. Normally, human consciousness passes through that space so quickly that harvesters don't notice. But sometimes people get stuck there. Exactly. And when that happens, the harvesters take those souls and absorb their life energy. It's how they sustain themselves. Marcus felt cold realization wash over him. But I came back before it could harvest me. Yes, and in doing so, you created a connection between yourself and the harvester. It followed that connection back to our world, intending to finish what it started. Madame Zelda turned the page, revealing an illustration that made Marcus's skin crawl. It showed a tall, thin figure with too many joints and eyes like black holes, surrounded by smaller human shapes that appeared to be dissolving into mist. But here's what makes your situation unique and dangerous. This particular harvester has been trapped in the liminal space for over 1,000 years. Trapped how? by a ritual very similar to the one we're about to perform. A monk in medieval Germany performed the ritual to banish a harvester that had been possessing people in his village. The ritual worked, but instead of destroying the creature, it imprisoned it in the space between worlds. Sarah leaned forward. So this thing has been waiting 1,000 years for revenge. Not just revenge, freedom. It's learned during its imprisonment, grown stronger, more cunning. Most harvesters are creatures of instinct, but this one has had centuries to study human nature, to understand our weaknesses and desires. Marcus stared at the illustration, noting details that seemed familiar from his glimpses of the entity. What does it really want? To live, to experience physical existence instead of being trapped in the gray space between worlds. It's been feeding on souls for a millennium, collecting their memories and experiences, learning what it means to be human. Now it wants to experience humanity firsthand. Using my body, your memories, your relationships. It would become Marcus Chun in every way except the most fundamental. It would still be a creature of pure predatory instinct, wearing a human mask. Madame Zelda closed the book and looked directly at Marcus. There's something else. The ritual the German monk performed required a sacrifice. He had to die permanently to trap the harvester. I believe this creature has been manipulating events for centuries, waiting for someone to perform a similar ritual so it could escape its prison. You think it wanted me to attempt this? I think it's been influencing the electromagnetic experiments Dr. Reyes mentioned, weakening the barriers between worlds specifically to create more cases like yours. It needed someone to voluntarily enter the liminal space and challenge it to the kind of contest that could break its prison. Marcus felt like the floor was dropping out from under him. So this entire thing, my accident, my death, coming back with supernatural abilities, all of it was orchestrated? Influenced at minimum. Harvesters are patient creatures. This one has had 1,000 years to plan its escape. Sarah stood up abruptly. Then we're not doing this. We'll find another way. There's no other way, Madame Zelda said firmly. The entity grows stronger every day. Soon it won't need to possess people to affect the physical world. And once it reaches that level of power, it will be able to open permanent doorways between the worlds. What does that mean? It means every harvester in the liminal space will be able to cross over. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all seeking human hosts. The dead will walk among the living, and no one will be safe. Marcus looked at Sarah, seeing his own fear reflected in her eyes. How do I win against something that's been planning this for 1,000 years? By remembering that you have something it doesn't, genuine human love. Harvesters understand obsession, possessiveness, hunger. They don't understand sacrifice, made willingly out of love for another. Madame Zelda began lighting additional candles around the altar. The contest won't be a battle of strength or cunning. It will be a battle of will, fought in a space where thoughts and emotions have physical reality. Your love for Sarah, your connection to life and humanity, those are your weapons. And if I lose? If you lose, the entity claims your body and soul permanently. But more than that, it gains access to all your memories, your knowledge of the modern world, your understanding of how human society works. It would be a predator with 1,000 years of collected human experience, set loose in a world of 7 billion potential victims. Marcus lay back on the altar, closing his eyes and trying to center himself. Around him, he could feel the supernatural energies that Madame Zelda was calling up, ancient powers that predated human civilization. Remember, Madame Zelda said as she began the incantation that would stop his heart. In the liminal space, reality is malleable. What you believe becomes real. Your love for Sarah isn't just an emotion there. It's a force that can reshape the very fabric of that realm. As the ritual began and Marcus felt his consciousness start to separate from his body, his last thought was of Sarah's face. Not as she looked now, pale and worried, but as she'd looked on their wedding day, radiant with joy and absolutely certain that their love could overcome anything. He held onto that image as the world dissolved around him and he fell once again into the gray space between life and death. This time he was expected. Chapter 11, The Return. The liminal space had changed. When Marcus had first found himself here during his accident, it had been a vast gray expanse populated by indistinct shapes and whispered voices. Now it was a twisted mockery of reality. Fragments of his own memories and fears assembled into a nightmarish landscape. He stood in what appeared to be his childhood home, but the walls were covered with photographs of every person who had ever died in his presence. His grandmother, colleagues who'd passed away, strangers from news reports whose deaths had affected him, and in every photograph, the subject's eyes had been replaced with black holes that seemed to pull light into themselves. "Welcome back, Marcus Chun." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Marcus turned slowly, knowing he would see the harvester, but hoping he was wrong. The entity stood in the doorway of what had once been his childhood bedroom, but it was no longer the indistinct shadow that had haunted him. Here in its natural realm, it was revealed in all its terrible glory. It stood 9 feet tall, its body a grotesque parody of human anatomy stretched and twisted into impossible proportions. Its skin was the color of old parchment, and symbols covered every inch of its flesh, not tattoos, but wounds that had been carved deep and filled with something that moved like liquid shadow. Its face was the worst part. It had too many eyes, arranged in clusters across what should have been its forehead and cheeks, and each eye showed a different human face in its depths, souls that had collected over the centuries, trapped forever in its gaze. "You're more perceptive than I expected," the harvester said, its voice like grinding stone. "Most humans see only what they expect to see, but you see me as I truly am. What do you want?" "What I have always wanted. Freedom. Life. The chance to experience existence as something other than a collector of discarded souls." The entity moved closer, and Marcus could see that its feet didn't quite touch the ground. Even here, in its own realm, it remained slightly displaced from reality. "Do you know what it's like, Marcus, to spend 1,000 years watching life from the outside? To feel the memories and emotions of countless souls without ever experiencing them firsthand? Then why don't you just leave me alone and find your own life?" The harvester laughed, and the sound made every photograph on the walls crack. "Because I am not alive, and I cannot become alive through my own will. I need a bridge, someone who has experienced both death and life, who has connections to both realms. You are that bridge." Marcus looked around the twisted version of. "I claim the right to inhabit the body and life of Marcus Chun by right of prior ownership. This human died and entered my realm. By the laws that govern such transitions, his soul became mine to collect. That he was artificially returned to life does not negate my claim. It merely delays my collection." "State your evidence." Marcus Chun was clinically dead for 12 minutes and 15 seconds. During that time, his consciousness resided fully in the liminal space under my jurisdiction. I had begun the process of soul collection when external forces from the realm of the living, interfered with natural law. The arbiters turned their hidden faces toward Marcus. "State your claim, mortal." Marcus stepped forward, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "I claim the right to my own life by virtue of the fact that I willingly returned to this realm to challenge this entity. The laws of balance that govern this space should recognize that voluntary action carries more weight than circumstantial presence." "State your evidence." "I died accidentally, not by choice. My presence in the liminal space was temporary and involuntary. When given the opportunity to return to life, I took it. That return was not theft. It was reclamation of what was rightfully mine." The harvester's human disguise flickered, revealing glimpses of its true form underneath. The mortal speaks of rights, but ignores responsibilities. His return to life upset the natural balance. Every day he continues to exist, he accumulates a debt that grows larger. That debt can only be paid with life, his life, or the lives of those connected to him. One of the arbiters leaned forward. "Show us the consequences of this imbalance." Space around them shifted, and suddenly Marcus was watching scenes from the past weeks play out like movies on invisible screens. He saw Sarah being possessed, saw the terror in her eyes as something else controlled her body. He saw the spirits in the cemetery, agitated and frightened by his presence. He saw the electromagnetic disturbances that Dr. Reyes had mentioned, the barriers between worlds growing thinner. Behold the chaos his resurrection has caused. The harvester said, the dead cannot rest because one of theirs is returned. The living are endangered by supernatural forces that his presence attracts. The natural order has been disrupted, and it will not heal until balance is restored. Marcus felt despair beginning to creep into his heart. How could he argue with evidence of the harm his resurrection had caused? But then he remembered Madame Zelda's words. Your love for Sarah isn't just an emotion here. It's a force that can reshape reality. You're right, Marcus said, surprising everyone, including himself. My return did upset the balance. But the solution isn't to compound that mistake by allowing an ancient predator to loose among the living. He stepped closer to the center of the courtroom, and as he did, the space began to change around him. Images appeared, not of chaos and supernatural disturbance, but of love and connection and the precious moments that made life worth living. Yes, I disrupted the natural order, but I did it out of love for my wife, for the life we were building together, for the future we planned to share. That love doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to everyone who has ever fought to stay alive when death seemed easier, everyone who has ever chosen hope over despair. The images around them multiplied, millions of moments of human love and sacrifice, of people choosing to live despite pain, of connections that transcended the boundaries between life and death. This entity wants to experience life, but it doesn't understand what life really is. Life isn't just sensation and experience. It's connection, sacrifice, the willingness to suffer for others. It has collected thousands of souls, absorbed their memories, but it has never truly loved anyone. The harvester's form began to shift back toward its monstrous true appearance. Love is weakness. Love is what makes humans vulnerable to creatures like me. Love is what makes humans strong enough to challenge creatures like you. Marcus turned to address the arbiters directly. I'm not asking you to ignore the consequences of my resurrection. I'm asking you to consider whether those consequences are worth preventing something far worse. If this entity gains access to the living world, if it learns to mimic human love well enough to manipulate and prey on others, the disruption will be catastrophic. And what do you offer to restore balance? One of the arbiters asked. Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would determine not just his fate, but Sarah's and potentially the fate of the living world itself. I offer to become a guardian, to use my connection to both realms to protect the barriers between worlds, to hunt down other entities that try to cross over illegally and send them back where they belong. The harvester snarled. You would condemn yourself to a life of supernatural warfare. I would choose to use my unusual circumstances to protect others. That's what love does. It transforms burden into purpose. The arbiters conferred among themselves in voices too low to hear. The courtroom space seemed to hold its breath, waiting for their decision. Finally, one of them spoke. The claims have been heard. The evidence has been presented. We find that while the mortal's resurrection did indeed disrupt natural law, his willingness to accept responsibility and dedicate his life to maintaining balance demonstrates the kind of character that should be preserved. Marcus felt relief flood through him, but the arbiter wasn't finished. However, the harvester's claim of prior ownership cannot be entirely dismissed. Therefore, we propose a compromise. Marcus's relief turned to dread. In his experience, supernatural compromises were rarely favorable to mortals. The mortal will return to life, but he will retain his connection to the liminal space. He will be able to see and interact with entities from this realm, and he will be tasked with preventing unauthorized crossings between worlds. And the harvester will return to its duties in the liminal space, but it will be granted 1 hour each year to experience physical existence through willing human hosts. Absolutely not, Marcus said immediately. The alternative, the arbiter continued. is that we grant the harvester's original claim and allow it permanent possession of your body. Marcus realized he was trapped. The arbiters were offering him a choice between allowing the harvester 1 hour of freedom per year or giving it permanent freedom with his body as its vessel. What guarantees do I have that it won't use that hour to cause massive harm? You will be present during its manifestations. If it violates the terms of this agreement, you will have the authority to banish it permanently. It wasn't ideal, but it was survivable. More importantly, it kept the harvester from gaining permanent access to the living world. I accept. The harvester's form writhed with rage. You deny me true life and offer scraps instead? You accept scraps, one of the arbiters said, or you return to your prison. Those are your options. After a long moment, the entity's rage subsided into bitter acceptance. I accept. The courtroom began to dissolve around him, and Marcus felt himself being pulled back toward the world of the living. But as he faded from the liminal space, he heard the harvester's final words. Enjoy your victory, Marcus Chen. But remember, I am patient and I am cunning. Our arrangement gives me 1 hour per year to study the living world firsthand. In time, I will learn enough about your realm to find ways around our agreement. As consciousness returned to his body, Marcus realized that he had won the battle, but possibly set the stage for a much larger war. Chapter 12, Preparation. Marcus opened his eyes to find himself back on the stone altar in Madame Zelda's basement, Sarah's worried face hovering above him. But something was different. He could see the spiritual energy radiating from both women like colored auras, and the basement itself seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. How do you feel? Sarah asked, helping him sit up. Different, more connected to everything. Marcus looked around the basement, noting details that hadn't been visible before. Symbols on the walls pulsed with their own light, and he could see thin threads of energy connecting various magical objects. I can see things I couldn't see before. That's normal, Madame Zelda said, gathering her ritual materials. Your consciousness has been expanded by exposure to the liminal space. You will be able to perceive supernatural phenomena much more clearly now. And the harvester, bound by the agreement you made. But Marcus, you need to understand what you've committed yourself to. 1 hour per year might not sound like much, but in that hour, the entity will have access to human sensory experience, human memory, human understanding of how our world works. Sarah gripped his hand tighter. What does that mean for us? It means that each year, the harvester will become more dangerous, more knowledgeable about human weaknesses and desires. Eventually, it may find ways to circumvent the restrictions placed on it. Marcus stood up slowly, testing his balance. His body felt the same, but his perception of the world around him had been fundamentally altered. He could sense spiritual presences throughout the building above them, could feel the electromagnetic disturbances that Dr. Reyes had mentioned like a low-level humming in his bones. When will its first manifestation occur? The agreement specified that the timing would be of your choosing. But Marcus, you can't delay indefinitely. The longer you wait, the more the entity will pressure you through supernatural harassment. What kind of harassment? As if summoned by his question, the temperature in the basement dropped 20 degrees. Frost began forming on the stone walls, and all the candles flickered in unison. That kind, Madame Zelda said grimly. It's expressing its displeasure with the restrictions placed on it. A voice echoed through the basement, seeming to come from the walls themselves. I grow impatient, Marcus Chen. Choose a time for my manifestation, or I will choose it myself. You can't choose it yourself, Marcus replied. The arbiter specified that I control the timing. The arbiter specified that I receive 1 hour per year. They did not specify that I must wait for your permission each time. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the supernatural temperature drop. What does that mean? Madame Zelda was frantically flipping through her ancient book. He's right. The agreement guarantees him annual access, but doesn't explicitly give you control over when it occurs. So he could manifest at any time, within reason. The entity is still bound by certain cosmic laws. It can't manifest during times when you're emotionally or physically vulnerable, as that would constitute an unfair advantage. Define vulnerable. Serious illness, extreme emotional distress during sleep, under the influence of drugs or alcohol, situations where your ability to monitor its actions would be compromised. Sarah looked between them with growing alarm. So this thing could take over a human body at random times throughout the year? Not random, Madame Zelda corrected. It still needs a willing host. But willing doesn't necessarily mean enthusiastic. It just means someone who consents to the possession, even if that consent is obtained through manipulation or coercion. Marcus began to understand the full scope of what he'd agreed to. It could approach people when they're desperate or vulnerable, offer them something they need in exchange for 1 hour of possession. Exactly. And once it has that hour, it will use it to gather information, make connections, perhaps even commit acts that advance its long-term goals. The frost on the walls began to form patterns, symbols that looked almost like words in a language Marcus didn't recognize, but somehow understood. It's telling us that its first manifestation will occur within the next month, Madame Zelda translated, and it's already identified a potential host. Who? The symbols shifted, forming new patterns. Madame Zelda's face went pale as she read them. David Kumar's sister, the woman Dr. Reyes told you about, the one who's been searching for her missing brother. Marcus felt ice water replace the blood in his veins. It's going to approach her while she's grieving and desperate for answers about her brother? The entity has had time to study human psychology from the souls it's collected. It knows exactly how to manipulate someone in emotional pain. Sarah stood up abruptly. We have to warn her. Warn her of what? Madame Zelda asked. That a supernatural entity wants to possess her for an hour in exchange for information about her missing brother? She's more likely to think we're insane than dangerous. Then we go to her, Marcus said. We find her before the harvester does and explain the situation. And if she doesn't believe us, then we make sure we're there when the entity manifests. I may not be able to control when it appears, but I can control how closely I monitor its activities. Madame Zelda closed her book and looked at Marcus with something approaching pity. You realize this is going to be your life now. Constantly tracking supernatural threats, intervening in manifestations, trying to prevent an ancient predator from accumulating enough knowledge and connections to break free of its constraints. I realize it. And you're prepared for what that might cost you. The danger to Sarah, to any family you might have, to your career and normal life. Marcus looked at Sarah, seeing his own determination reflected in her eyes. We don't have a choice, Sarah said. If this entity is allowed to study and manipulate the living world unchecked, eventually it will find a way to break free entirely. And when that happens, Marcus finished, it won't just be my problem anymore. It'll be everyone's problem. Outside the basement, storm clouds were gathering again, but this time Marcus could see them for what they really were. Supernatural energy building to a crescendo. Reality itself preparing for the manifestation of something that had been imprisoned for 1,000 years. The harvester was about to get its first taste of human life in centuries, and Marcus was the only thing standing between it and complete freedom. Chapter 13. The Voluntary Death. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in a hotel room in Phoenix, Arizona, watching Priya Kumar pace by the window. She was a small woman in her 30s with tired eyes, and the kind of determination that comes from refusing to give up hope even when hope seems pointless. You're telling me my brother is alive but trapped in some kind of supernatural dimension, she said for the third time. I'm telling you that the entity responsible for his disappearance is about to approach you with an offer, Marcus replied. It will promise you information about David in exchange for allowing it to possess your body for 1 hour. Priya stopped pacing and stared at him. And you know this how? Because the same entity has been attached to me since I came back from clinical death 3 months ago. I made an agreement with it. 1 hour of manifestation per year in exchange for leaving me and my family alone. Sarah, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, spoke up. Priya, I know how insane this sounds, but we've seen what this thing can do. It possessed me, made me float in midair, spoke through my voice. It's real and it's dangerous. Even if I believed you, Priya said, why would I turn down a chance to learn what happened to David? He's been missing for 6 months. The police have given up. I'm the only one still looking for him. Marcus had been dreading this question because he wasn't sure he had a good answer. If he were in Priya's position, desperate for information about a missing loved one, would he turn down the entity's offer? Because once it has accessed your body, it will learn things about you, your memories, your relationships, your vulnerabilities. It will use that information to manipulate not just you, but everyone you care about. And what if it actually gives me information about David? What if it tells me where he is? Then we'll find him together, without giving a predatory entity access to your body and mind. Priya was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the Phoenix skyline. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. David was researching this thing before he disappeared, wasn't he? That's how you know about him. Marcus nodded. According to our sources, he was trying to find ways to send back what he'd brought over from the other side. Did he succeed? We don't know. He vanished before anyone could find out what he'd learned. So there's a chance he found a way to get rid of it permanently. There's a chance. Priya turned away from the window. If I agree to let this entity possess me, and if it gives me information about David, will you help me find him? Marcus exchanged glances with Sarah. They had hoped to prevent the possession entirely, but Priya's desperation was stronger than their warnings. If you insist on going through with this, I'll be there to monitor the entity's actions and intervene if necessary. But Priya, you need to understand that once it's inside your body, it will have access to everything you are. Every memory, every fear, every person you love. I understand. But Marcus could see in her eyes that she didn't really understand. She couldn't understand because she'd never experienced the violation of having something else control her body, speak with her voice, use her face to smile at people she loved while planning their destruction. That evening, they waited in Priya's apartment. Marcus had arranged protective circles using techniques Madame Zelda had taught him, and Sarah stood ready with recording equipment to document whatever the entity might reveal. At exactly 9:17 p.m., the temperature in the room dropped 30 degrees. It's here, Marcus said. Frost began forming on the windows, and all the lights in the apartment started flickering in a rhythmic pattern. When the harvester's voice spoke, it seemed to come from every surface at once. Priya Kumar, I have information about your brother. Priya stepped forward, her hands shaking but her voice steady. What do you want in return? 1 hour of access to your physical form. I will experience life through your senses while sharing what I know about David's fate. Will you hurt me? I have no interest in damaging my host. My goal is observation and experience, not destruction. Marcus wanted to point out that the entity's definition of damage might not align with human understanding, but he held his tongue. Priya had made her decision. I agree, she said. The possession happened differently than Marcus had expected. Instead of the violent takeover he'd witnessed with Sarah, this was more like watching someone fall asleep standing up. Priya's eyes closed. Her breathing became shallow, and when she opened her eyes again, something else was looking out through them. Fascinating, the entity said, using Priya's voice, but with slightly different inflections. Human vision is much more limited than I remembered, but the other senses are remarkably acute. It moved Priya's body carefully, like someone learning to walk in an unfamiliar space. It touched the walls, examined objects on tables, held its hands up to the light, and studied the play of shadows across the skin. You promised information about David, Marcus said. Indeed I did. The entity turned Priya's face toward him, but the expression was alien, too focused, too analytical. David Kumar succeeded in his research. He found a way to permanently banish entities like myself from the realm of the living. Where is he now? He performed the banishment ritual on himself, but the process required him to sever his own connection to the physical world. He exists now in a state between life and death, unable to return to either. Marcus felt his blood turn cold. You're saying he's trapped in the liminal space? Not trapped, transformed. He has become something new, a guardian spirit whose purpose is to prevent creatures like myself from crossing between worlds. Can we reach him? Perhaps, but doing so would require one of you to enter the liminal space voluntarily. And unlike your previous journey, Marcus, this would be a one-way trip. You would need to die permanently to contact him. The entity spent the rest of its hour exploring human sensory experience, tasting food, listening to music, feeling different textures. It was disturbing to watch something alien use Priya's body to satisfy its curiosity about human existence, but it kept its word about not causing harm. When the hour ended, Priya collapsed. Marcus caught her as she fell, checking her pulse and breathing. Both were normal, but she remained unconscious for several minutes. When she finally woke up, her first words were, "I remember everything. I could see and hear everything it did, but I couldn't control my body." How do you feel? Violated and terrified, but also, she paused, seeming to search for the right words. It showed me things while it was in my head. Images of David. He's alive, Marcus, but he's not coming back. He chose to sacrifice his human life to protect others. Marcus helped her sit up. "I'm sorry. Don't be. At least now I know. And I know he's still fighting, still trying to protect people from things like that." She looked at Marcus with new understanding. "Just like you are." Sarah knelt beside them. "Priya, are you sure you're all right? That thing was in your head for an hour." "I'm sure. But Marcus, there's something else. While it was possessing me, I could sense its thoughts, its plans. It's not just collecting information randomly. It's building towards something specific." "What kind of something?" "It's looking for a way to possess multiple people simultaneously. It wants to create a network of hosts that it can control remotely, building an army of humans under its influence." Marcus felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. How many people would it need? "I don't know, but it's already identified potential targets, people who've had near-death experiences like yours, people who are vulnerable to supernatural influence." As they left Priya's apartment that night, Marcus realized that his agreement with the Harvester hadn't solved anything. It had simply given the entity exactly what it needed to plan something far worse than individual possessions. And somewhere in the space between life and death, David Kumar was fighting a war that Marcus was only beginning to understand. Chapter 14, Battle in the Limbo. The decision came to Marcus in the middle of the night, as he lay in bed listening to Sarah breathe beside him. Through their window, he could see shadows moving with purpose across their neighbor's yard, spirits drawn by the supernatural energy that now surrounded him like a beacon. In the 3 months since his agreement with the Harvester, the entity had manifested 12 more times, each possession teaching it more about human nature and society. It was learning to mimic human emotions, to manipulate people with increasing sophistication. And as Priya had warned, it was building a network. Marcus had tracked down 4 other people who'd been approached by the entity, all of them desperate individuals who'd agreed to possession in exchange for something they needed. A mother whose child was missing, a man facing bankruptcy, a woman dying of cancer who'd been promised a cure. Each time, the Harvester had honored its bargains technically while gaining invaluable intelligence about human weaknesses. But tonight was different. Tonight, Marcus could feel something building in the supernatural realm, a gathering of energy that suggested the entity was preparing for its next phase. He slipped out of bed and made his way to the study, where he'd been keeping detailed notes on every manifestation. The pattern was clear. The Harvester was systematically identifying and cataloging people who could serve as hosts for other entities. His phone rang at 2:47 a.m. Dr. Reyes's name appeared on the screen. "Marcus, we have a problem," she said without preamble. "I'm getting reports of simultaneous supernatural events in 7 different cities. Possessions, poltergeist activity, people claiming to see dead relatives. It's happening everywhere at once. Marcus felt ice settle in his stomach. It's starting. What's starting? The entity I made an agreement with. It's not working alone anymore. It's been gathering information for other harvesters, teaching them how to cross over. How many are we talking about? Marcus looked at his notes, calculating based on the entity's behavior patterns. Potentially hundreds, maybe thousands. Jesus Christ, what do we do? There's only one option left. I have to go back to the liminal space and try to stop this at the source. Marcus, you told me that would be a one-way trip. It might be, but if I don't try, we're looking at a supernatural invasion that will make what I've been dealing with look insignificant. After ending the call, Marcus sat in his study for a long time, trying to work up the courage to wake Sarah and tell her what he decided. When he finally returned to their bedroom, he found her sitting up in bed, waiting for him. "You're going to do it, aren't you?" she said. "You're going to die again to stop this thing." "How did you?" "Because I know you, and because I can feel it too. The wrongness building in the air, the sense that something terrible is about to happen." Marcus sat on the edge of the bed. "Sarah, I don't want to leave you, but if these entities succeed in opening permanent doorways between worlds..." "I know. I understand." She took his hands in hers. "But this time, I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not." "Marcus, you said it yourself. David Kumar found a way to banish these things permanently, but he had to sacrifice his human life to do it. What if it takes two people? What if you need help from someone who loves you enough to follow you into death?" "I won't let you." "You won't let me?" "Marcus, we're married. We promised each other in sickness and in health, till death do us part." "Well, death already tried to part us once, and it didn't work. Maybe this is what we're meant to do together." Marcus wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in Sarah's eyes, the same determination that had made him fight to come back from clinical death in the first place. 3 hours later, they stood in Madame Zelda's basement for the second time. The old woman had aged visibly in the months since Marcus's first ritual, as if the supernatural energies she worked with were taking a physical toll. "I can send you both into the liminal space," she said. "But I need you to understand that this time, there's no guarantee of resurrection. You'll be entering that realm as equals to the entities that inhabit it, not as temporary visitors." "We understand," Sarah said. "And if you succeed in stopping this invasion, you may find yourselves unable to return to normal human life. The liminal space changes people. David Kumar became something new, a guardian spirit. You might face the same transformation." Marcus looked at Sarah one last time. "Are you sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything." As Madame Zelda began the ritual that would stop both their hearts simultaneously, Marcus held Sarah's hand and focused on the love that had brought them this far. Whatever they found in the space between worlds, they would face it together. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was Sarah's face, serene and determined, ready to follow him into death itself. When awareness returned, they were standing in the gray expanse of the liminal space, but it was no longer the twisted mockery of reality Marcus had encountered during his contest with the Harvester. Instead, it appeared as a vast battlefield. Thousands of shadowy entities moved across the gray landscape, all heading in the same direction, toward tears in the fabric of reality that showed glimpses of the living world beyond. And standing between the entities and those tears was a single figure in modern clothing, David Kumar. But he was no longer entirely human. His form flickered between solid and translucent, and energy that looked like captured starlight played around his hands and eyes. "Marcus, Sarah," he called out as he saw them. "Thank God. I can't hold them much longer." Marcus and Sarah ran toward him, dodging between groups of harvesters that seemed intent on reaching the dimensional tiers. As they got closer, Marcus could see that David was weaving some kind of barrier between the entities and their goal, but the effort was clearly exhausting him. "How long have you been fighting them?" Sarah asked. Time doesn't work the same way here, David replied, not taking his eyes off the advancing horde. Could be days, could be years. They started gathering about an hour ago in your timeline, right after your friend completed its network of contacts. How do we stop them? We close the tiers permanently, but it requires a sacrifice. Someone has to take responsibility for the damage that's been done to the barriers between worlds and commit to maintaining those barriers forever. Marcus understood immediately. You want us to become guardians like you. Not like me. Instead of me. I've been holding this position alone for too long. I'm losing cohesion, becoming more spirit than consciousness. If you two take over, I can finally rest. A group of harvesters broke through David's barrier and rushed toward the nearest dimensional tear. Marcus acted on instinct, extending his hand toward them and somehow managing to generate a wall of energy that stopped their advance. The effort left him drained but exhilarated. Here in the liminal space, his will had direct power over reality. How do we do it? Sarah asked, forming her own energy barrier to contain another group of entities. Together, David said. The three of us weave a permanent seal around the tiers. Then you two take positions as eternal guardians, while I move on to whatever comes after. What about our lives? Our world. Gone. This is your world now. But Marcus, Sarah, you'll be together. And you'll be protecting everyone and everything you've ever loved. As the harvesters pressed closer to the dimensional tiers, Marcus realized they were out of time for debate. Either they committed to this sacrifice now, or the invasion would succeed. He looked at Sarah, seeing his own resolve reflected in her eyes. Together, he asked. Together, she confirmed. The three of them joined hands and began to weave their combined will into a barrier around the dimensional tiers. The energy required was enormous. Marcus felt his consciousness stretching and expanding, becoming something larger and more diffuse than human awareness. As the barrier solidified and the tiers began to close, the harvesters let out a collective shriek of rage and disappointment. One by one, they faded back into the gray depths of the liminal space, their invasion thwarted. David smiled as his form began to dissolve into points of light. Thank you, both of you. The burden is yours now, but you won't carry it alone. As he faded completely, Marcus felt the weight of guardianship settle onto his and Sarah's shoulders. They were no longer human in the traditional sense, but they were still themselves, still in love, still committed to protecting the boundary between life and death, forever. Chapter 15, The Price of Victory. Marcus opened his eyes to find himself back in Madame Zelda's basement, but something was fundamentally wrong. He could see his own body lying on the stone altar, pale and motionless, while Madame Zelda worked frantically to restart his heart. Marcus. Sarah's voice came from beside him. She was standing next to her own motionless form, watching the old woman attempt CPR on both their bodies simultaneously. We're dead, Marcus said, the reality of it hitting him like a physical blow. Really dead this time. But we're still here. Still us. They were indeed still themselves, but transformed. Their forms were translucent, shifting between solid and ethereal depending on their focus. When Marcus concentrated, he could feel the barriers between dimensions humming around him like a massive instrument he was somehow responsible for tuning. The liminal space, Sarah said, understanding dawning in her voice. We're still there, aren't we? Part of us anyway. Marcus nodded. He could sense the gray expanse where they'd fought the harvesters, could feel David Kumar's presence fading as he moved on to whatever realm awaited truly departed souls. But he could also perceive Madame Zelda's basement, the physical world where their bodies lay cooling on stone altars. We exist in both places now, he realized, guardians between worlds. Madame Zelda finally stopped her resuscitation efforts and checked their pulses one final time. When she found none, she sat back heavily in her chair and closed her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered to their corpses. I should have found another way. She can't see us, Sarah observed, but as if summoned by her words, other figures began to appear in the basement. Spirits that had been invisible to everyone but Marcus were now manifesting clearly. The elderly nurse from the hospital, the child from the cemetery, dozens of others who had been trying to communicate with the living world for years. "You can see us now," Eleanor Patterson said, her voice filled with wonder. "All of us. And we can see you," Marcus replied. "What does that mean?" "It means you're the bridge we've been waiting for. Living people who can communicate with the dead. Help us find peace. Help us move on to whatever comes next." Marcus looked around at the assembled spirits, understanding flooding through him. Their sacrifice had done more than stop the Harvester invasion. It had created a permanent communication channel between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. "But we're not living anymore," Sarah pointed out. "Aren't you?" Eleanor asked. "Your hearts may have stopped, but you're still thinking, still feeling, still choosing to help others. What is that if not life?" Over the following days, Marcus and Sarah learned the full extent of their new existence. They could manifest to anyone with even slight supernatural sensitivity, could influence physical objects when necessary, and most importantly, could perceive and prevent attempts by malevolent entities to cross between dimensions. They watched as Madame Zelda arranged for their bodies to be buried together, watched as their friends and families grieved for their apparent deaths. It was heartbreaking to see their loved ones in pain, but Marcus discovered they could sometimes provide comfort, appearing in dreams, leaving signs that they were still present in some form. Priya Kumar was the first living person to see them clearly. She developed supernatural sensitivity after her possession experience, and when she visited their grave 3 weeks after the funeral, she gasped audibly upon seeing them standing beside their shared headstone. "Marcus, Sarah, but how is this possible?" "We're guardians now," Marcus explained, protecting the barriers between worlds, helping lost spirits find peace. "And your brother David?" Sarah asked. "He's moved on. He's finally at rest." Priya began to cry, tears of grief mixed with relief. He always wanted to help people. I guess he found the ultimate way to do that. As months passed, Marcus and Sarah developed a routine. They patrolled the liminal space, preventing unauthorized crossings by malevolent entities. They appeared to people who were struggling with supernatural encounters, providing guidance and protection. They helped confused spirits understand their condition and find their way to whatever came next. It wasn't the life they'd planned, but it was meaningful in ways they'd never imagined. Dr. Reyes published a paper about the sudden cessation of supernatural incidents following Marcus and Sarah's deaths. Though she couldn't explain the connection, Madame Zelda continued her work, but with the knowledge that truly benevolent guardians were watching over her efforts. And sometimes, late at night, when the barriers between worlds were thinnest, Marcus and Sarah would manifest to each other in forms that felt almost human, holding hands and remembering what it had felt like to be alive in the traditional sense. "Do you regret it?" Sarah asked during one of these moments. "Never," Marcus replied. "We're still together."